Hello folks and welcome back. In this presentation I'll be going through chapter 16 from my book. That's going to cover my Amanita Muscaria mushroom experience. I'm going to be unpacking more symbolism surrounding Christmas. I'm going to look at the Jesus Christ and the 12 days of Christmas story, the freedom teachings, more of what happened in 2022 for me, the Scarab Beetle Nephilim infiltration, my 33rd birthday, Horus and Hathor, and the Zoitcast. Right, so as I write my book, as 2021 drew to a close, our Lebanese cedar tree at the front of the property decided to sprout an Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is seemingly quite rare, as you can see there in the photo, the top two left images. Since moving into the property in 2008, 2021 was the only year a mushroom like this sprouted from the pine tree they are so often associated with, which the Lebanese cedar tree is a family of. Something in the biochemical makeup of the pine needles that drop and excrete into the soil make for the perfect conditions for these mushrooms to sprout around mid-autumn, which again is around Scorpio season. When I saw this growing over the week, it triggered huge revelations for me in relation to the pagan origins of Santa Claus, reindeers, and Christmas. As I've just alluded to, these particular mushrooms sprout at the base of any tree in the pine family, iconic of us putting a Christmas tree up and laying presents underneath with the famous red and white colours of Christmas. Siberian shamans used to eat these mushrooms, as did the reindeers. The reindeers loved this stuff, which is why they used to dance and prance around when high off them, and of course can explain the red-nosed reindeer, Rudolph. Shamans no doubt probably saw a few flying reindeer whilst ingesting them, and probably some of the elves that Terence McKenna always talked about with his entheogen experiments, something that evaded my experiences. I never saw these elves that quite a few people talk about. That's kind of more linked with DMT, I think. Especially these kind of like mechanical elves, right, within the hologram doing what they're doing, which might go into actually some of these really small units of beings that are part of the scalar wave manifestation of the polychi grids. That's quite interesting, actually. That's just come to me. So maybe that is part of some of the forms that they take, who knows. So when taking it, as I later did in December, it makes you very merry, akin to a light, warm, drunk feeling without the toxic attributes from alcohol, but very heart chakra oriented. Ingesting these would give the taker with spiritual insight, strength, and ability to converse with the gods in order to help the tribe. The shamans would often have to descend down the chimney in their yurts during Christmas due to being snowed under, which is symbolic of Santa coming down the chimney. In modern times, folks would soak the mushroom in milk and leave it out overnight to help decarboxylate the chemicals, sharing a similar practice where children are told to leave milk and cookies out for Santa. This is the mushroom otherwise depicted in Mario Brothers, which makes Mario big and strong when ingested in the game. The Vikings used to take these before battle and did a battle dance that released adrenaline and mixed with the ibotanic acid and muscimol, creating the berserker mode, which is why they were so feared on the battlefield. I also remember going for a walk in Cannon Hill, if you recollect, where I had that November 2018 experience of the two orbs, which is a conifer plantation, part of the pine tree family, where I noticed the holly bush bears fruit around this time of year too, all showing us that Christmas, at its very roots, is pagan and shamanic in origin, completely immersive of nature. The birth of the Son of God is also linked to our sun being born again after being sent to his tomb of the winter solstice, where the sun sits still on the ecliptic for 3 days before moving 1 degree each day along the ecliptic toward the summer solstice on the 25th, a pure astronomical phenomenon. That's obviously all taken from the perspective of us being here on Earth. The sun never dies, it's always there, perpetually distributing its fission fusion electromagnetic waves, within the solar system. We also have another interpretation of the Christmas story according to the MCO AMCC teachings, published in the title PDF that reads The Real Christmas Story, which was in December 2001, which involved Jeheshua 12 going through his activations, which is the MC conjugate baptism and regent ordination under the guidance of John the Baptist over what we now call the 12 days of Christmas. That started on December 21st in 12 BC, which brought in the avatar level identity of Jeshua to become Jeheshua 12 in a soul-braided walk-in. The three wise kings were three Melchizedek cloister regent Magi Grail king priests from other lands that brought the necessary condiments for John the Baptist to conduct the ordination of Jeshua, as well as help initiate the electrical frequency transmissions through the gates of the inner earth portals that would allow for the soul braid walk-in to take place. They say that one of the inner earth priests, called Ma'a, was responsible for the inspiration behind the Father Christmas symbolism, as he assisted the three Grail kings via the inner earth passages, appearing as an old shepherd who became known in the writings as the Way Shower and the Shepherd of Light. The Egyptian Magi king brought with him a very special substance called celestialine blue powder gold, manufactured in inner earth by the Ayani priests of Ur, which is a liquid substance excreted through the skin during activation of turnstile DNA in the human atomic transmutation process associated with Stargate Passage ascension. As this liquid dries, it becomes fine powder nicknamed Stardust Blue and or Blue Powder Gold. This allows a short burst of troll strand DNA template activation that can occur when ingested, which assisted in bringing in an avatar level identity in a very rare 12-day indigo soul-bred walk-in, as happened with Jeshua, the first time a troll strand DNA template activated embodied avatar walked this earth since 208,216 BC. Each day of the 12 represented the activation of the Bi-Vector code within one of the 12 DNA strand templates of infant Jeshua, which allowed for the codes to be reset in Earth's Templar to allow for the fulfillment of the planetary Christos realignment mission for the forthcoming 2000 to 2017 AD stellar activation cycle. This realignment mission was intended to complete on December 21st, 2012, but as later updates to the Invisible War drama progressed and were released, things had changed and a deeper level of intervention was necessary in order to assist Earth and parts of its biological life forms to ensure ascension through the Crystal River failsafe host, according to the MCO AMCC teachings, as I've alluded to. Okay, which this is otherwise another really interesting angle again of the whole Christ story to consider with the 12 days of Christmas. What's more, Jeshua was supposedly born on November 22nd in 12 BC, okay, at 12:14 AM, making him a Sagittarius right on the cusp, right, which may have actually aligned with Ophiuchus back then, which would have been a sidereal and tropical alignment given the precessional slippage and where the stars would have been in 12 BC as compared to today, okay, all in time for the age of Pisces. So he would have been on the cusp of Scorpio going into Sagittarius, just right on that 21st, 22nd of the morning of the 22nd, right on the cusp of Scorpio and Sagittarius, okay, which could also be around where Ophiuchus is. Okay, so technically Jeshua was almost like a Scorpio / Ophiuchus right on the cusp of a Sagittarius, right? And quite interesting how it ties in as above so below with the new age of Pisces coming in around that era, right? That would have been at the cusp of the spring equinox with Aries just finishing, with the Old Testament, right, with the sun in the age of Aries, with Moses in the Old Testament, and then obviously as Jesus came in, gave birth to the New Testament, under the sun in the age of Pisces, Jupiter being its domicile, and thus this being again with the J, okay, Moses linked to kind of Mars and that M energy of the maritime, that martial force that Mars domiciles and is the ruler of. Then you have with Pisces right on cue, Jesus, an entity again carrying that same phonetic of the J with Jupiter, Zeus, J Zeus, right? Jesus incarnates 2,000 years ago, right on the brink and the cusp of the age of Pisces. All right, so it all connects when you connect all this in. It certainly all rhymes. So I can't help but question the admittance of these synchronicities we have covered with the age of Pisces, Jupiter and Venus behind this story of Jesus that all shares this astrological root, which only aids in the magic of how intelligent and deeply integrated these foreign objects are on top of what the MCO AMCC teachings have brought. The three kings can also be portrayed as being the three stars in the belt of Orion leading to Sirius, which would have arisen around midnight of Christmas Day back then, symbolizing the ushering in of the Son of God, okay, spelled both ways, the S-U-N and the S-O-N, being birthed again, both in the literal sense of an avatar being and in the astrological sense of bringing forth the sun on its ascending arc of longer days and shorter nights as the sun climbs along the ecliptic to its throne at the summer solstice, gifting us with the pattern of the analema each year as this cycle repeats. And now this is obviously taken from a northern hemisphere perspective, but if you actually look from a southern hemisphere perspective, if you assign the ecliptic, right, the sine wave to particular times of year, that obviously we know the southern hemisphere in December 21st is their summer solstice, not their winter solstice. It's all back to front. But if you look at the winter solstice here in the southern hemisphere, which is obviously meant to be representative of this Christmas period, this is where they also have the end of their fiscal year, okay, which is where you do your tax returns, which all goes into the return of the sun being birthed again. And that's why I think in July it'd be June 21st. So all of June and kind of end of May, they have month-long clearances and sales within all the corporations here in the Southern Hemisphere, because everyone's getting ready to write off more of their tax come, submitting their income tax statements for the businesses. And so there's obviously, a lot of discounting, a lot of sales that go on around the holy days, which is otherwise kind of going into this process of venerating actually the sine wave process, that the Southern Hemisphere is actually, ritualizing the re-embodiment of this Christmas as above from an astrological, astronomical point of view on June 21st, June 25th. Okay, that is woven within the sine wave of the energies and the arcs and angles that the sun bestows on the planet down here in the world of effects. Okay, that is very interesting to analyze and see these patterns, that it's not just about, just from a northern hemisphere perspective, but if you flip it, you can actually see when you follow the sine wave at like a tropical level, you can actually see these same patterns reoccurring, where the winter solstice down here, they follow suit. That's the end of their fiscal year, and that's when they do their tax returns. And that's when, from a southern hemisphere point of view, the sun again will be birthed again on the 25th, going back down towards the Tropic of Capricorn in order to then bring forth longer days and shorter nights, okay, depending on, your latitude south of the equator. Okay, will be more extreme the further south you are in regards to that change of the longer days, shorter nights, okay, and that kind of cycle. So it's very interesting. So even the more advanced aspects of the literal on-earth interpretations of these holy stories seem to be coincidentally guided by the causal realm of the stars that precede them. Regardless, it is all information at the end of the day that can be used in consideration when formulating a universal worldview in order to seek the truth from facts. I still remain neutral and approach much of this as scientifically as possible, so to not fall into the trap of belief and just taking someone's word for it. But there certainly is more credible sources of information and stories than others that can help in the investigations. The astrological interpretations can be proven. It's only the literal we have to be careful in navigating until we have first-hand knowledge and irrefutable proof. But we do possess a conscience and intuition that most oftentimes guides us to the truth. And as we have already established, there seems to be multiple interpretations when it comes to symbology and the mysteries that I'm sure any adept and initiate would realize that leaving the interpretation of any given story to only one lens would certainly leave the individual at a disadvantage when decoding them, as we have already seen confirmed by Manly P. Hall with the achromatic cipher, where each parable and allegory is susceptible to several interpretations, with the seventh being the most complete and highest truth, encompassing the previous six lesser interpretations. Okay, so it's just kind of tapping into that, again, idea of being an investigative, logical, rational, reasonable thinking human being when dissecting the mysteries, and that now we've got these multiple lenses in which to decode certain stories and allegories and symbolisms, okay, that we can't just, again, fall into that trap of belief. It's in the middle of every belief, it's a lie, but we can otherwise, consider it when going forward and putting things in the box of maybe until as time marches on, we can have first, verifiable proof that's irrefutable. Okay, so a lot of the claims that is made from the MCI MCC teachings, even though rationally it makes a lot of sense to me, and there's a resonance and intuition there that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's kind of like very empowering, and you plug it into the context of the models that they're giving us with the cosmogeny and the geometries and how they're exposing even more of the kind of forces of evil. It certainly is put into that box that is more towards the affirmative compared to it being right in the middle of maybe. But it's kind of like it still has to be verified, right, as we go on, as we activate, as we wake up. But it certainly is, very credible and definitely worth considering when going forward. Likewise, with the ecliptic and the signs of the zodiac, the astrological wheel, with all the modalities, the elements, the rulership, the domiciles, the detriments, the exaltations, the characters and personalities of these planets within the solar system, that is all known, that we can observe in nature and directly connect it astrotheologically to what is written about in scripture. Okay, so that is irrefutable, right? So that can be put in the affirmative box that yes, we know, we can see this story is definitely linked to the stars. It's an allegory as above for the stars. Okay, and then obviously, as we said before, there's multiple lenses of interpretation, one of which is astrobiologically, this ascending of the chrism, Santa coming down the chimney, which is our spine as we've gone into, depositing the presence at the base of our lumbar, right, in our sacral plexus, the sacred chambers of secrets, okay, or secretions. And then if you work consciously, you can raise the chrism back up to Golgotha, the place of the skull, where it activates your pituitary and pineal gland rather. And you can have like this amazing awakening, which is the symbolic of the star put on top of, or the angel put on top of the tree, which our spine represents. Again, astrobiologically, this conifer can certainly represent that process of inner alchemy. And so as above, so below, very much the same. And then on a literal level, there probably was, and there definitely was an individual that came in under the auspices and parameters and qualities, right, of the configurations of the planet, that then donned that holographically within their incarnation here in order to then go about within that framework, within the parameters set within the holographic time matrix of this kind of mathematical simulated model, this kind of mission that was underway, that kind of they had to take with like the J symbolism with J Zeus, Jupiter Zeus, all right, all around when it was the age of Pisces, Jesus being the fisher of men, Pisces being the two fish. It just, you cannot ignore, for me at least, there's three ciphers there of the literal story, the astrotheological story as above, right, and the astrobiological interpretation, okay, which I think the astrotheological and the astrobiological one is two that for me is bizarrely omitted from the MCO AMCC teachings, that is otherwise very, let's say, satisfying to come into knowledge of when connected into the fabric of everything, okay, and seeing how it all syncretizes, right, which is all about that right brain, being able to analyze and see it woven into this kind of fractal holographic time matrix that we're in, that it kind of just emanates. You can see all these recurrent patterns, which for me is otherwise very beautiful. So as Iyasha also states in the Dance for Love Disc 4 workshop, when talking about the Christ period, where she was directly involved as Jeshua's half-sister Miriam, right, with her past life memories of her incarnation and involvement around the Christ drama, that preserving the truth was often a tricky game when trying to hide in plain sight within written books and texts they were trying to leave behind, whilst the other side, the Drax and Anunnaki, were trying to cover up the knowledge left during that time by the real Jeheshua 12 and Margie team, open quote. But what they had to do was cover up anything that had to do with the real Jeshua, because if they didn't, there would be too much knowledge that would be written. I mean, when we would get books down, you give them 6 months in those days and there'd be something different. So there were several copies of things handwritten, and one would be the real one, and you would hide that somewhere special, and then you'd have ones with certain alterations put in them that would, if you read them right, lead you to where the real one might be. All sorts of games being played back then by both sides just to keep the truth on the planet and the other guys trying to get rid of it, end quote. We cannot also forget mentioning that Santa is an anagram for Satan, who is the lord of karma, Saturn, who also domiciles in Capricorn and whose sign begins on December 21st, which probably inspired the song Santa Claus is Coming to Town, that alludes to this concept of reaping what you sow, with the lord of karma coming to deliver your goods. Okay, a quality also symbolic of trick or treat associated with Halloween that could very well be inspired by this fear, which uses fear of punishment from God as its means to incite control. Okay, if you recollect the nursery rhyme, I'm just going to read it out. It goes, you better watch out, you better not cry, you better not pout, I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town, he's making a list and checking it twice. Going to find out who's naughty and nice. Santa Claus is coming to town, he sees you when you're sleeping, it's a bit creepy. He knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. All right, so just re-emphasizing this kind of connection to Saturn, Satan, being an anagram of Santa, with this kind of like concept of making a list of your sins, seeing whether you're good or bad, and then this false god connecting to Jehovah and this false, Anu Elohim collective and the Anunnaki pinning you to the cross and pretending to be our gods, judging us and determining whether we are worthy of gifts, we're worthy of ascension, and our birthright and stuff like this that they've certainly controlled and manipulated, as we've learned already, given the history. So the experience I had on the Amanita Muscaria mushroom was quite a pleasant one. I was initially reluctant to want to take any more entheogens based purely on my sensitivity and vulnerability to attacks by this point, with everything that had gone on with my last few mushroom trips being quite challenging, especially the New Forest experience, okay, as well as hell showing up on my doorstep in the end of 2020 and it continuing to stalk me, with all the energy attacks and stuff that, persisted, even up until this day. But I came round to wanting to take it as I felt it was a gift for me given by the tree. I went online and searched for the best ways to prepare the mushroom, where I found boiling the mushroom for 5 to 10 minutes, draining and then frying in butter and used with a meal was one way to ingest without harm, so I followed suit. I went upstairs after eating and put some meditation music on and sat on my beanbag in my room. It took around 40 minutes for me to start feeling the effects, which, as I described earlier, was very merry and warm sensations within my body that felt centered at the heart chakra. It was a different vibe compared to the Mexican cubensis I had been working with in the past. It felt like I was being given an etheric hug the whole time, with not being able to help holding a pleasant smile on my face. As I was encased and embraced with this wonderful feeling, with my headphones on and meditation music creating an atmosphere of pure bliss, I sunk back in my chair with eyes closed and went on a bit of a journey through my mind's eye. I remember flying up to a position above the earth in space, looking down at this wonderful pearl, and being met by an angelic being, a female, who came next to me to admire the view and was telling me about how important the children are here and that it was important we protect the children. My awareness then came back into my room, where I enjoyed playing with colours and feelings for the remainder of the experience that lasted around an hour or so before I then got up and went about getting ready for bed. It was certainly not as strong as my previous experiences, but initiated an immense feeling of love associated with the activation and opening of the heart chakra. This led me, for the next few months, to put a call out most every night to be reunited with my twin/soulmate, if she is here on Earth, which will become relevant later. But yeah, there you can see the Margie Grail Kings, 12 Days of Christmas, very interesting interpretation and lens to consider, and the old pine tree and how it's all connected into the presence at the bottom of the tree. Amanita Muscaria sprouting, which is like a present spiritually speaking, a gift. Okay, that certainly was a gift left by this beautiful tree that we had at the front of the house that unfortunately later got struck by lightning in 2022 of June. So it's kind of almost like a parting gift too, looking back at the timeline after the events that happened. So the Freedom Teachings, it was in December 2021 where I finally came across Iasha from a video that Santos Bonacci was sharing about something which immediately triggered me to try and find out who this woman is, as I knew she had important information for me as I was seeking to find out exactly what is going on and why I have been targeted so much and had gone through so many battles, and to help me on my quest of remembering who I am and where I came from and why I'm here. I stumbled upon a YouTube channel around New Year's of 2022 who shared a media file link with most of Iasha's dispensations from 1998 to 2012 of the Emerald Covenant Freedom Teachings, okay, the MCEO, part of the MCEO AMCC, but the AMCC aspect kind of came in after the events of 2012 with the shield split, which supposedly resulted in that, with the dark flower and affliction and the attacks from the Fatali on the Indigos here that upgraded the mission to, fail-safe status. I started working my way through the lectures, taking notes and uploading highlights on my YouTube channel, which kickstarted a resurgence in the materials online, as I'd also shared the media file link to download the resource I had discovered. I started seeing all these other YouTube channels spring up with lectures being uploaded. Unfortunately, my channel and most all other channels got taken down due to copyright infringement enforced by Arheas Productions, aka Yasha's company that now owns the copyright to the materials. And I write in my book, their claim for doing this was to prevent the people from being plugged into the Jehovah's trumpet pulses that were still being cleared when exercising the techniques, okay, at the light body level. However, for me, it was a lifesaver in regards to learning more advanced information and at least strengthening my own resolve and being by absorbing the information with all the symbol codes, diagrams, songs, and geometries, which absolutely helped aid me in my activations and understanding, so I could better equip myself on this journey of awakening, as there had been an indigo hunt, okay, and they were trying to wipe me off the grids. Begs the question though, why not upload the material and edit out the techniques? These are meant to be the freedom teachings, not owned by any one particular person, but the right to be known by all as universal knowledge. I get that there is a responsibility that must be had when protecting the rest of us, but information bereft of any technique would surely serve to enlighten the masses, as it had done for me. There is also two arguments for and against the copyright, which I have surmised with my law research and the whole legal system they have established, okay, with everything, basically operates through the Crown, which is basically the Vatican. Anything you register with an agency outside of yourself, you're giving title and rights away to that agency. And because all agencies within all governments who are members of Unidroit are owned by the Vatican, all of these agencies are mere vassals and different snakes on the head of Medusa, keeping records for the Vatican, which is the Crown. Thus, Regis means crown and forms the root of the word register. Thus, the copyright is crown copyright. And you would argue, or you could argue, that the Vatican holds title and rights to the materials that Iasha has published due to them registering for copyright, which would give the powers to these interests to suppress the teachings and strike them off any platform if it were shared, due to them now holding copyright. Okay, it puts the works in a very precarious situation for this to be abused and used if needed. This is just my views. I'm only speculating, right? However, such as the laws of commerce, it can also offer protection in regards to stopping someone else copying the materials, claiming it as their own in a filing for copyright, which would then give that individual control of the works until such time it is contested by the original producer of the works, which is the Asher. So there is intelligence and copyrights in the materials to protect it in that way and stay in control of how the information gets to be shared. Currently, there is no public platform apart from the website she has at arhaeus.com that shares the materials. There have been recent promises in her latest workshops of the materials being made public once the trumpet's clear, so this may have already come to pass since writing this, which actually it hasn't, not yet that I know of anyway. Something that needs to happen, and I imagine will happen when Earth continues its ascension. I mean, it has to happen, right? If it doesn't, you know you're on the full timeline, because basically the rulers of this system will not dispense then the enlightening knowledge of our true history, agendas, technologies, etc. So it would not be a good sign. So to copyright something that should be free and accessed by all of creation, as the name suggests, freedom teachings, is a bit of an oxymoron when using it to suppress the sharing of knowledge on public platforms such as YouTube. But such is the nature of humans and our desire to adapt, seek and grow, and no thanks to the internet, there were many individuals who thankfully sprung up with private Facebook and Telegram groups, often, after everything got shut down by Arhaeus, to help gain access to the materials and join a community of others who were on the path of discovery, and which I felt were in dire need of this information, given the state of the world and what was going on ever since 2020. Yeah, so there was a lot of Facebook groups, Telegram groups, and a lot of obviously alternative platforms like BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, that started to upload and keep the teachings and lectures. So it was kind of like a mini resurgence that I felt like was so necessary, that covertly kept kind of, proliferating under the radar of the main platforms of like YouTube, which, Arhaeus kept slamming and shutting down based on the copyright strikes, which again, I completely understand. With the techniques, there's a responsibility for them to uphold what the Guardians advise in regards to not doing any light body techniques at the MCO level that could plug you right into the energies of the fallen Anu Elohim Jehovah trumpet pulses that were still being pulsed through the grids of the earth. That if you were running these techniques, it would just plug you right into that, and that can come into your template, and that can cause damage, and maybe irreversible. Who knows? All right, but like I said before, there's certainly a means in which to edit out the techniques, have every video uploaded with a disclaimer, work with only the plasma teachings at the moment, go over to our website, and it could even be a really good advertising campaign to garner more resources in regards to revenue for them when, inviting people to treat themselves with the knowledge at the MCO level and then come into the website, as you can see here, Arhaeus Productions, in order to learn the plasma level teachings. Okay, and obviously with my views, with obviously what I was led into first in regards to decoding the economics and the legal tricks and traps in the whole monetary system, is absolutely backwards and the biggest fraud on the planet. That this is my disagreement with the Guardians in regards to what she's dispensed with: do not rebel against institutions and pay your taxes. No, if you truly understand what's going on with what they're doing with the paperwork and the spell work with when you're born, right? Everyone's declared a stillborn who is died without a will intestate, imbued with a criminal charge, and made collateral for all the debt. And that tax is merely a revenue scheme in order to pay off the interest due on the debt that's owed to the central bank, who gives the government money from an account at zero balance, okay, as proved with Richard A. Werner's paper with Banks as Credit Creators back in 2014, right? Empirically, that consciously speaking, when you come into that knowledge and knowing exactly how the system is set up, I do not know anyone with their connection to their soul self and morality and have like a moral compass and integrity that would actively go and help contribute towards feeding that system and feeding your own slavery, and not doing something about actually changing your status and learning how to play the game on paper within the two-dimensional paper contracts and procedure realm, right, of all these legal tricks and traps, where all of these claims being made against us, all of these spells that we're not working collectively to dispel, but simply putting pen to paper, because the pen is far mightier than the sword, and relaying, withdrawing consent and putting in our terms and conditions, right? So I think there was a huge missed beat in the tactics needed in order to help shift this planet onto a much better timeline when addressing this issue at a more physical two-dimensional level, paper contracts and procedures, that pens us as soon as we come into this world, with anyone who's got a birth certificate, as liable and giving our assent away to these bankrupt corporations disguised as governments, okay, where we effectively been declared dead. Okay, so under universal law, for them to bypass their karma and do all the things that they're doing, they're doing it to dead individuals that are willingly and have consented to play dead. Is there going to be any retribution in the universal karmic laws that are kind of woven into the intelligent design of this holographic time matrix? Probably not. And this is why they meticulously go through doing what they do by using us as manifestors and drawing consent, because silence is acquiescence mainly, for us to manifest what they want in regards to locking in certain timelines. Okay, and that's why they go to so much effort with revelation of the method, predictive programming, soft disclosure, and drip feeding, consent, drawing consent out of us 24/7, right, with the media and everything else. Why would they do that? Just think about it. Backwards engineer that. You can see it's always so subtle. They're always trying to inch their way, totalitarian tiptoe, problem, reaction, solution. Thank you, David Icke. And so it's so important at like a two-dimensional 3D physical level to be educated in this with joy consent, understand the legal tricks and traps and what's happening with the banking law and economics in order to safeguard your sweat equity, take back your power and sovereignty, withdraw consent, and then put in your legal terms and conditions under contract. Okay, because these contracts, these two-dimensional pieces of paper, whatever you agreed upon can happen all throughout the stack of your multi-dimensional selves. Okay, so that's how powerful, and that's the only thing I feel like the Guardians are missing a beat on with the teachings, is that they're not addressing this hardcore down-to-earth level of what they're doing ever since we're born into this system, and what that is implying in terms of giving our sovereignty and power away, and that energetically people are still feeding their own slavery through the whole economic, bankrupt, maritime admiralty governmental system, where tax is merely used to raise revenue for interest due on debt that is created from an account of zero balance. All right, and none of it, 99% of it, goes towards servicing that interest. It's an absolute scam, Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme. It's the biggest fraud that I just do not understand how these guys at that level of understanding of spiritual knowledge can actually you have to be unconscious of that fact. That's probably why they do it. Pay your tax and set everything up the way they've set it up, not even within like a 508c1a, right, which is one of the probably the best, the only solution for protecting freedom of speech and being tax exempt, right, which you're still able to register with the government that they respect. Otherwise, you can set up a common law private trust, understand the postal road mechanics, the power of registration, and then when you set up your own court of office under your own hand and seal, you can basically retain your title and rights to any entity that you create them by yourself, okay, which is probably far superior than what I think these guys are doing. But anyway, that's just my opinion. All right, take it or leave it. It's just information at the end of the day. That's that. So prior to and spilling over into 2022, I had Crowley Jr. make a reappearance in the hologramic synchronistic times that led to an interesting event of covert infiltration in the astrals. Because he wasn't on any form of social media, it was easy to cut contact with him and otherwise prove that people are moved into your lives by higher forces in order to perpetuate certain agendas. So always be wary of these people. 2022 seems to be a lesson in this, as I was approaching my 33rd birthday, which is obviously a very important number, as you have discovered. That is otherwise linked to the age at which you typically have your avatar level of consciousness embodied if you are born in a Christic system. Something I feel we still experience to a certain extent in the initiation process for those going through an awakening around that age. So I had no contact for about a year or so with Crowley Jr. Then all of a sudden he makes these appearances. I knew something was going on. The chances of us crossing paths when I would, walk into town, that happened on numerous occasions, were not coincidence. I would also see him in the sauna at the leisure centre I went at the exact times and days I would go. I kept things amicable and otherwise always found them to be amusing to me anyway, just due to the case study of an individual who's a real life Nephilim soul incarnate who has pledged his life to Lucifer and had a rather twisted view of life and spirituality that always came across in frenetic, often unintelligible babble that I was pretty amazed by. Seeing the deterioration in him was quite evident since I last saw him, reflecting the energies he was otherwise, aligning with and embodying. His purpose was to link up to get me to make one of these IDs for him that I was selling on my website to help preserve people's freedoms that he had obviously had a look at. I obliged, thinking this guy, can't do any harm to me, even though he was a big lad. I think even he knew in his Nephilim oversoul knew that a physical altercation / infiltration in that regard would not go well for him. So as always, with the nature of Luciferian snakes, they bite you when you are not looking and least expect it. So I invited him over to my place to pick up the IDs once they were done. I showed him around the house as to where all these paranormal events had been taking place, as well as my bedroom, showing him where I saw the light that messed with my solar plexus from the window. Everything was pretty normal in that regard. He picked up the IDs, and left after I gave him a tour. He otherwise left me with like a couple of magazines, I think, again from Neil Gaiman, which are like comic books, which are kind of a bit, if you study and look at Neil Gaiman stuff, it's kind of heavily linked into the Kabbalistic, Judeo, Anu Elohim, Jehovian kind of interpretation of them being gods and Lucifer being the Anu Seraphim races and the fallen Seraphim races that they're kind of competing against, pretending to be, our creators when they're not. Kind of spin on it. It was kind of like a very demonic book that kind of went into this doll in the doll house or something like that. And there was like a weird message he gave me again, which was kind of like just very cryptic and just very strange. However, a few days later, one early morning before waking up, I must have returned from the astrals with my consciousness ready to merge back into my body and wake up, where I was partially stopped and still suspended in the astrals, but pretty much merged with my body, where I saw Crowley Jr. sat at the end of my bed, where he immediately placed this Scarab beetle under my duvet, which crawled all the way up my body very quickly and buried itself into my left neck area. As this happened all very quickly, I remember saying to him, "Oh, you fucker," when acknowledging what was going on, where I then woke up. Okay, the Beetles are linked to the Beetle people, which are of the Weesadek fallen matrix, if you recollect, which are also linked to the Nephilim, which is quite interesting. So it all connects again. The fact that I invited him into my home gave him the visual cue and invitation he needed in order to, project into that space. In order to do that, this Scarab Beetle outpitched in my physical body for months after, and even to this day, as I write this, with tightness and soreness in that area. Yes, this outpictured with tightness and soreness in that area for months after, so much so that I paid a visit to the local shaman I had seen before, who did my chakra realignment session and led me down the road of starseeds, etc., if you recollect, where she conducted astral surgery and was using, toning forks to try and extract the stuff that was buried in there. As she did the toning forks, I could literally feel things moving up my neck and into my ear, where she was extracting these spiky caterpillar type things she said she was picking up on in the astrals, and that there were more larvae in there waiting to hatch. She said it was very difficult to extract these things off her astral hands, and was there washing her hands for a while after doing the treatment, because it was like really fibrous and prickly, hairy, sticky entities, like little caterpillars that she was pulling out of my ear. But it was so bizarre. She was striking that tuning fork in my physical body, can actually feel things moving up and into my ear, and then that's when she was energetically trying to remove some of the stuff that had been buried there, and that this beetle probably hatched or laid eggs in order to act as infiltrating my physiology and energetic body. It didn't get rid of all of my symptoms, but it certainly helped. It wasn't until 2023 where I realized that area of the neck was associated with one of the Jehovian death seals, if you recall from the diagram showing the crucifixion implants and checkerboard mutations. When I revisited the teachings, the area where the Scarab beetle had buried itself was the J6 seal, which was around the time when that trumpet blast was actually activated in the process of clearing. I wrote an email to Crowley Jr. to withdraw all consent and politely tell him, and through him, his shadow dancer Nephilim Luciferian handlers, to back off. I then had an interesting experience not too long after that email, where in the dream state, I dispatched of Crowley Jr., who was lurking in the distance of my dream, where I was walking with a girl who possessed a bag with a lightsaber in it. As we were walking and I was watching Crowley Jr., I took the opportunity to give Crowley Jr. a warning to back off by telling the girl that I was a Jedi and could I please borrow the lightsaber, which he complied, and I activated it, but on a low setting, which stings/stuns rather than cuts and zaps Crowley Jr., and told him to back off, otherwise it will be more severe. It was as if he was constantly shadowing me and looking for a way in to infiltrate again. That wasn't the end of him though. All right, he did pop up later. Interestingly, I had a weird experience with the shaman in the astrals as well one time, where I was all of a sudden lucid, sat on the floor with my back to her, slightly elevated on a stool behind me, wherein she was pulsation energy through her vagina and into my heart chakra that propelled me into a space that continued to get darker and deeper until I reached a point of thinking this ain't right. So I pulled my consciousness all the way back into that body. I then stood up and turned around to look at her and take in the environment I was in. I asked her what she was doing, and she explained that my heart had been tainted and she was helping to clear it. I remember seeing a circle set up from which we were sat in the middle with all kinds of these witchy ornaments such as skulls, animal skeletons, stones and gems located all around us within this circle. We were located by a tree, but on a dry patch of warm grass next to a small partition wall that blocked the view of this mountain that had all of these beautiful waterfalls. As soon as I stood up and saw these waterfalls, I got the encryption that we were at the Metagalactic Falls. So I woke up after that and messaged her that day of how I remembered her doing something to me in the astrals the previous night, and she replied, "Oh, that was you," with the surprised eyes emoji. I didn't give details what happened and left it as that. I got the impression that I had caught her in an act that otherwise was probably not part of a healing ritual, but energy extraction ritual. So I called her out. So it was at this point when I realized that the only person who is really able to heal you and assist you is yourself and higher counterparts, and you've got to be so careful who you trust, none more so than acclaimed energy healers, right? And so-called witches and shamans. We are our own shaman at the end of the day, and we should not rely too much on those outside of ourselves who otherwise do not re-emphasize this fact and help you come into your own power, activations, and personal records. Okay. That being said, there obviously are very crystallically aligned individuals who have extreme, wonderful healing capabilities who can actually help you and assist you on your journey. It's just a matter of tuning into where they're at, trusting your gut, intuition, but otherwise trying to expend doing what you can personally yourself, especially given if you're working through the teachings and the techniques that you can then, if you've exhausted all those methods, you still have an issue, then you can obviously go and seek someone that you're guided to, just feel into it, do an assessment, analyze their CV, ask your guardians, your guides, your innermost higher self, God source, whether it is the right individual that can actually assist you on your journey. So of course, there are times when intervention and help from outsiders are necessary, but I guess my message is be very careful with who you think you can trust. I found out also that she had christened and nicknamed her car Lucifer and wondered why she was always having so many animals jump out in front of her as roadkill when navigating the country roads between her work and home. She was an advocate of having one foot in the darkness and one foot in the light to keep things balanced, but as they say, anything from the darkness / false light is tainted and a poison well, which leads one to destruction. If drawn from, as we have discovered with the nature of working with demons, where many a magician end up having to battle to prolong their lives to try and delay the inevitable, which goes into the main motivation for energy vampiring practices that she may have been caught in doing. Okay, regardless, by this point I realized that I had the power and consciously became aware of such practices to put a stop to it. All right, so I'm my best teacher, I'm my best guide, I'm my best healer, and my own unique connection to my higher selves and God source first eternal, and that's what we're going to put first amongst all others, especially in a time matrix where we're just full of so many infiltrants and so many imposters and charlatans who can really appear as your saviors and angels, right, within this BV drama and this polarity drama that's playing out. Okay, they're going to be so careful reading between the lines and discern, and if you have gone through it, learn the lesson, move on, okay, and thank your lucky stars that you survived, and otherwise, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and just carry that positive attitude and get to learn the different flavors and angles and techniques and technologies of the forces of darkness, okay, because there are many that I especially came into encountering that otherwise served me very well and provided me more strength and wisdom in order to combat these guys. So I've got to thank them at the end of the day, right? And I also send blessings and healings and protection to this individual, okay, that he may sever his cords and connections to the Nephilim, fallen Anunnaki matrices and everything else that connects into it, Lucifer and Azazel, right? And so he can be delivered and come back into his true Christic avatar original connection of his higher self. So Horus and Hathor, as I was nearing my 33rd birthday toward the end of February in 2022, I had another interesting astral experience, okay, where I became lucid and felt quite ill, carrying an injury to my left arm. I was stood up in a room off a courtyard in an ancient Greek style building with 3 deep wounds that were like slashes from a claw on my forearm and another on my upper arm that probably had been inflicted in battle not too long ago. I had my left arm bent and partly supported by my right arm and could see the wound was infected, which was starting to wilt and spread this dragon scale type fungus infection in my body. Yeah, so it was like here on my upper arm, right, slashed, three open wounds, and then also on my forearm, like here. So it's like something with talons, right, which goes into reptilians and also birds that just obviously grabbed hold and just ripped open my arm. That was like wilting. It was quite deep, and I was a bit sick as a result of this. And I can see this dragon-like fungus starting to spread, which was what, was the reason why I was feeling a little bit sick and kind of bit out of it. So there was no blood, but the wounds were open and deep. It was like a reptilian creature of some kind with 3 talons had slashed both my forearm and upper arm, maybe from me trying to block or fend one off in battle. It was very symbolic also, given the fact I was turning 33, or just had turned 33 when this happened, right, when I had this dream experience, with the slashes representing 3 and 3, 33, right? I could sense my body was battling the infection, which made me a little groggy, but I think it was making progress. I headed outside, where I was met with a being who appeared as my sister, right, dressed in attire you would associate with light elven battle armor as portrayed in the movie franchise The Lord of the Rings. Her presence was pretty commanding, and I noted seeing tall Nordic type beings behind her in the courtyard tending to a weapon stand that had axes and swords, etc. She started to speak in this very powerful language, maybe Anahazi, I had never heard of before, where I said in my mind through telepathy, "Who are you?" I then got a nudge to look at my left inner arm, where she started to inscribe in fire letters like a tattoo, but the letters were filled with moving fire, akin to the Lord of the Rings ring, okay, with the way the elven writing appears, when he puts it in the fire, or, when it's activated, the words, right, Hathor, okay, and that's why I got a tattoo, kind of venerating this. This gave me the idea to get a tattoo after this dream experience. It was quite surreal. She continued to speak in this foreign tongue, which transcribed and translated in smaller letters beneath this on my inner arm, right, so even beneath this, there was more little letters being etched into my skin. It didn't feel any pain, but it was otherwise like fire letters. It was so amazing. Yeah, so the little statement under the Hathor, okay, on my arm, otherwise read, "We are in the battle for men." Okay, she then told me to follow her to grab my battle axe, which was in one of the rooms, where I then woke up after that experience. So as I was studying more of the MCO freedom teachings that I got my hands on in 2022, it invoked a dream experience with a blue Syrian being called Ea, pronounced Ea. Okay, I write it as EA, but it's kind of pronounced EAH, Ea. I was on board a super yacht type ship that was otherwise in space overlooking Earth, where I felt this presence in the room behind me. It was a dining room with a great big round table in the middle of a very luxurious interior designed room you would come to expect on multi-billion-dollar yachts. The table had this huge decorating protection cloth on it that all of a sudden had someone manifest within it. The being brushed aside the cloth as it slid off the table and stood up to come and greet me. The being was a blue Syrian being whose name was Ea, that I immediately got the telepathic confirmation of. She was asking me all of these questions about Earth and the mission that was underway, as if I was giving a report. I remember her saying about, whether this had happened, that had happened, where I would most oftentimes reply no. It's weird because I did not know about the things she was mentioning consciously, but was responding almost subconsciously to those parts of myself that knew what she was referring to. It's as if my memory had maybe been erased to protect the information I knew upon returning from this experience down here, like a security clearance kind of thing. There was this sense of urgency with her, and she implied that we are getting ready for departure. As we were walking around the vessel, we came across a guy who I'd worked with previously on the super yacht in 2018, 2019, if you recollect, of ecstasy, right? And she saw both of us and said that, you two should be one. She looked at both of us, she was like, "You two should be one." And then after that, I woke up. So about 2 or 3 days later, this is weird, I had the exact same guy, right, reach out to me on social media, checking in and catching up to let me know that he had also moved to Wimborne, where I was currently residing. So go figure. That was the first I heard from him in a few years since leaving the boat, and coincidentally reached out to me after that dream experience with him and Ea, mentioned how we should be, one. My only guess for that statement is that we are probably of the same soul identity and density too that incarnated here, and maybe as a result of what happened with the incarnation process, the soul essence got split into me and him. As I've alluded to, I'd always felt like I was in a war and cataclysm that led to me possibly being here, or that something maybe did not go entirely to plan. Regardless, when I was working on the boat, people would also comment that we looked like twins. Okay, we grew up in the same area as well once I moved to England, so it's interesting to see there is definitely a connection there. Okay, I never follow up with him about this subject, as I knew he wasn't activated as much as I had been with everything I was diving deep into, so I never really linked up to explore this connection and see whether he had any insights, but knew he had moved to be located near me, with helping to more than likely anchor energies for the grids. What's more, this Ea being had a very similar encryption to Easha, who also claims to be a Syrian as part of the councils there, where she would have incarnated through and have parts of her consciousness / higher self and identities stationed. I did have a dream encounter with Easha one time, along with her late husband Michael, who assisted me in removing a parasite from my ear, which is again quite interesting. I'd still been battling with my body being compromised as a result of the attacks in 2020 and the substance they injected me with in 2021 during my MRI scan, which I was trying my best to manage, but very draining on my energy. I certainly had been stung by the scorpion. I would always put calls out to ask for assistance, and now that Iasha had come to my awareness, I guess she maybe heard the call and offered to assist. I remember I was sat on the floor with her on a ledge slightly higher behind me. She was saying some mantras and moving her hands around my head when Michael was stood next to me extracting what looked like a straw from my ear, which moved like a worm. I remember saying thank you, and then I woke up. I also recall having quite a few dreams of battling and navigating through parasite-infested realities that also had portal networks and was otherwise something akin to the Marvel movie of Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, who was able to shrink down to the subatomic reality fields where a whole microcosm exists with beings, places, and politics. It made me think whether we are able to project our consciousness into these quantum subatomic realities within our own bodies, in which I was maybe seeing parts of my own subatomic worlds that were being taken over by these parasites that I was injected with. I think given the nature of consciousness and energy, and with the power of our imagination and how our reality system is structured, as above so below, that we certainly do possess a miniature version of the microcosm in our bodies that we could certainly transverse and conceptualize as being as vast as the space we can comprehend now in our 3D bodies, populated with beings, politics, portals, and places, if we were able to shrink ourselves down to relative size and project within those areas within us. With this sense of departure in my mind after the Ea dream experience, I was sensing, along with this timeline of the Great Tribulation seemingly unfolding, and the obvious degeneration and rise of depravity and outright coordinated decline in most of the Western world through ill policies, that departure may well be imminent, and something I was actually looking forward to, given my situation of being targeted more often than not. So to wrap up this chapter, I'll talk about really weird out-of-body experience, which kind of coincided with what I got the message of, like departing soon, because I almost did depart in this experience. So the Zoitcast. It was around March 2022 when I had this experience of being out of my body in my room, where I could see my body lying down on my bed asleep behind me. My room looked very similar, but there were a few variances in furniture. Okay, there was this teddy bear on top of these set of drawers, which became animated and jumped down from the dresser and onto the floor, where it proceeded to tell me that, we must leave. It is urgent. There is no time. Hurry. And I said, whoa. Hang on a minute. What do you mean we've got to leave? Well, I was thinking about my body behind me and feeling the loss of leaving like this all of a sudden and not saying goodbye to anyone, let alone wondering what would happen to my body. Yeah, I remember that. I was like, I could see my body. I was like, hang on, what's going on? I've got this like etheric teddy bear just jumping down, animated, telling me that we must leave. And I'm like, well, what's going to happen to my body? I'm like here, literally projected out of body, see myself asleep. And I just had all these questions. I was like, what is going on? The teddy bear, which was a form this entity took on, proceeded to explain to me that I had incarnated right on every timeline where the Zoitcast were, and that it was urgent we left as they were here to take me. As he said that, I could hear people downstairs break the door and enter into the home and proceed up the stair into the attic where my bedroom was located. This being the urge that I followed him into the next room, where there was a portal that opened up in the corner of the room in the ceiling. Never forget it, so lucid. He proceeded to jump into the portal that absorbed him and disappeared. I could hear the beings who broke into the house getting closer, so I went to try and jump through the portal, but nothing happened. I tried jumping a few times, but it just wasn't meant to be. And so I turned around, hid under the bed, and turned myself invisible. I watched as the beings ran into the room and surrounded the bed and stood there, waiting for what must have been their chief, who entered, whose boots were noticeably different compared to the others. It was like that scene out of the movie Taken, where the guy walks in and there's this spine-tingling silence before the girl was taken, where they proceeded to grab me with a few others to drag me out as I woke up. Yes, they inevitably got to me, right? And I just couldn't get through that portal. It was really bizarre, honestly. It was such a strange experience, and one that was nothing like I've ever had before in regards to being met with the potential of me leaving this plane and my body behind. I assume these beings were the Zoitcast the teddy bear was telling me about. They looked like an interdimensional SWAT team with very high-tech gear on, carrying guns with red dot lasers and full face masks, dressed in black. I don't recall any strange bleed-throughs happening in the waking state after that experience, or any changes to my circumstances other than what was to come next for me in the timeline. A twin flame union that led me out to Denver, Colorado, USA, the HQ for the Illuminati. That's where I end this chapter. Really interesting again. Few really bizarre experiences, but otherwise, yeah, it led me out to this weird twin flame union that we're going to get into in chapter 17. Okay, that's otherwise titled My Twin Flame Union Obviously, Denver, HQ for the Illuminati, the USA, the Four Corners, Atlantean Pylon Implant Network maps. Okay, so we're going to finally have a look at these maps, which are APIN for short. More Jesus Christ sinks, Thunderbolt from the Gods, Glastonbury, then Mill Hill, Stargate 11, we visited there. We saw Crop Circle and what Crop Circle's all about. Also going to Fatality Succubi, White Dragons, a little bit more, and Cloaked Ships, as I saw a few when I was out in Denver, and a weird 9/11 Rapture event that happened in the 11th of September 2022 when I was in Denver too, and then the Jesus Christ UCC 1 filing I got nudged to come across, and the Great Pyramid of Giza, Ark of the Covenant, Stargate Dream that I already alluded to in previous chapters of me having that experience of being shown the so-called Stargate that Jesuit 12 used to ascend out there when his mission was done here. Okay, so thanks again, guys, for watching, and as always, stay safe, stay sovereign, and I'll see you over in the next one. Ciao for now.